Well, the Productivity Commission is calling for an independent Aboriginal-led watchdog to be established, regardless of the outcome of the Voice referendum. It says the body needs to have broad remit and extensive powers so it can deal with the failure of governments and meaningfully contribute towards closing the gap. Joining us live now is the acting opposition leader, Sussan Ley. Sussan, good to see you. Thanks for your time this morning. So it was a pretty damning report that's come out, both of federal and state governments. So what's your response to that this morning?
Well, it's good to join you from Hobart, Pete, on my 2-week cost of living blitz, and I'll be spending some time with Senator John O'Doniam in the forestry areas of this wonderful state where even Tasmania has called out the failures of the Albanese government. Very happy to come to that. But on the Productivity Commission report that you mentioned, we will look at it closely, as I know will the government. I note that it points to the failures of decision-making and accountability, and I think that's really important. And I think all politicians need to read it closely. And I think there needs to be a doubling down of effort when it comes to recognising that gap in Indigenous disadvantage and doing something about it. But I also note, Pete, that the report doesn't say the voice is the answer.
No, but it says the report says we need to talk with people to get better outcomes. You'll get more efficiency if you listen to people. That's exactly what Anthony Albanese has been on about.
I don't know that he has. I would always say that you need to listen to people, and you need to recognise that Indigenous communities should speak with their own voice wherever they are in Australia. The regional and local voice approach that we had in government is the one that actually does reflect that. Now, the problem is that the Prime Minister can't explain how his constitutionally enshrined voice will actually lead to these better outcomes. Even he acknowledges that that design work won't be done until after the referendum. So we have to be so careful here. We have to recognise that if we institute more layers of bureaucracy, if we slow down decision-making, if we don't focus on the actual task, which is to close the gap, to insist on accountability, and to do it in a way that brings the whole nation with us instead of dividing the nation, which is exactly what we're seeing across Australia now. This timeline is Anthony Albanese's timeline. This division in the community is his division in the community.
Right, but do you accept, I mean, this report was signed off on by Scott Morrison back in 2020. Do you accept that the various governments have failed on this?
Then,
the draft
Pete.
report, yeah. So do you accept that various governments have failed?
All governments need to do better, and no one in a position of authority or accountability. And that's not just people in the parliament. It's people in the institutions themselves. It's people in the public service. It's people in local governance organisations. It's everyone. Pete, I've represented Western New South Wales and seen many different approaches to Indigenous policy making over the years. And I would say they have all been well-intentioned, but this is difficult, It's complex, it has to bring everyone with it. So it can't be dictating from above. It can't be simply something that sits at the top in a national body that actually doesn't. We have not had the explanation that we deserve about how it will work to close the gap. And in fact, we don't believe it will, because the way it's been designed, the little that we do know, actually doesn't give us that information.
So if not the voice, then how would you reverse the worsening trend when it comes to closing the gap? If not the voice, then what?
As I said, the local and regional voice approach that we took was a sound one. And we invested millions of dollars in this. Well, it starts at the grassroots. It starts with local capacity building. It starts with local accountability. And of course, we should listen to Indigenous Australians. We do through our organisations now. But I think what this report tells us is that their voices have not always been heard. So it's not that the structures haven't been in place, it's that the accountability hasn't been there. And I think that's really important. And I think people have to take responsibility right up and down what my colleagues call the supply chain within Indigenous provision of policy and outcomes.
So would you support the establishment of an independent Aboriginal-led watchdog?
Well, I haven't read the report in detail, Pete, so I'm not going to announce that as something.
But how does that sound?
I will say that, Well, accountability sounds good. A watchdog, there are watchdogs already in the system, and Aboriginal policy areas are not excluded from that. So it's important that we look through this closely. It's a very long report. It's been done by, the Productivity Commission, a well-respected body. Let's look into the detail.
Okay.
But again, what we should be doing as a parliament is doing this together. We should be doing this as a parliament across the party, talking about it, going through our various forms of decision-making in a way, again, that actually unites but doesn't divide Australia. The problem with the constitutionally enshrined voice from the Prime Minister is it's divisive right now, and you can see that all around you.
Just a couple of quick ones here, Susan. Key inflation data, it's out today. We just heard from Tom Petrovsky, actually. Core measure, 6.1 is the figure that we're all looking at. Where do you expect it to land today? Are we on the right track going by monthly data that's come before today?
Look, the figures will come out, but it was interesting listening to Tom, and I think even he made the point. There's a lot of statistics, there's a lot of numbers. Behind every one of those, there are people who are hurting. Now, we warned Anthony Albanese that in winter, Australians would be choosing between heating and eating. Now, Tasmanian Labor is using that exact expression in, I think, a media release yesterday. They're saying that 2/3 of Tasmanians right now feel worse off than they did 12 months ago. So the cost of living crisis is hurting everyone, everywhere. And the failure on behalf of the Albanese government to do anything about it. I mean, Jim Chalmers even said in a not much reported interview a week or so ago that he had no more plans to address cost of living. Now, really, how can this government accept the situation? And since they've come to government, they've just added risk into the economy, Pete. Risk when it comes to their ham-fisted interventions in the energy market, risk with their industrial relations reforms, and just that misunderstanding of what it means. I was at a food delivery place in northern suburbs of Brisbane. It was really interesting to hear how the cost of every single thing along the food supply chain is going up. So they're sort of being hit from all sides. So when you go into the bakery and get your cup of coffee and you think of the logistical supply chain to get all the ingredients and actually have that cup of coffee put in front of you, no wonder it's going up. No wonder ordinary Australians are struggling.
Sussan Ley, appreciate your time this morning.